Across esports history, a majority of memorable personalities are players. The rest mostly being either owners of organizations or obviously casting talent. But for the most part, the coaching role has been a fairly new development in esports simply because it wasn't economically feasible to support coaches. For the most part, I still remember a time in esports where it was a huge issue to send, for instance, in 5v5 esports, players to all kinds of tournaments because the travel costs were still a very significant portion of the expenses of an organization. Now the industry has significantly grown and sponsorship deals are generally higher. This isn't as much of an issue anymore, and the coaching role has been increasingly becoming more feasible for organizations, and in many cases, for instance in League of Legends and Counter-Strike, it almost has become a requirement in order to stay competitive. Now if we talk about like this, you can see in the bottom, if we talk about Overwatch producing a culture of superstar coaches, this is a different level that I'm anticipating. And with recently the information coming out, how many now sports teams as well as tech companies are willing to shell out for these city sports. So it's between 3 million and 50 million, 15 million in the case of LA. I think it's fair to say that we've now reached a level of industry where I can see a possibility for the industry changing in many ways, that would allow for superstar personalities in the matter of coaches. Now, if we look at sports, for instance, the Mourinhos, the Sir Alex Fergusons, the Arsene Wengers, the Phil Jacksons of the sports world are basically as big of a brand as their star players at the time. That certainly isn't the case in our established esports. Only recently, really, we have had any attention to them at all. So if we think about, for instance, in League of Legends, Daler, the former coach or the coach of Fnatic comes to mind, or I guess Starix for Navi and CS. These seem to have a considerable impact on the performance of their teams, and therefore it almost feels like a necessity to have a coach nowadays. And obviously, if we're looking to Korea, this has been true for a while with star coaches. For instance, in League of Legends, for SKT Kakoma, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he has been a fairly big personality and a obviously championship winning coach for quite a while. Now, if we're trying to justify my claim here, we first have to say that I think inherently Overwatch is the type of game that sort of requires a coach in order to keep it together. The first point being that a team needs to be managed, and Overwatch is also with 6 players now. Then most of the big esports have been 5 players. It's increasingly difficult to keep the team structure in balance. So for that reason, a sort of authority figure is needed. It's also true that Overwatch is a strategy-heavy game. And I would personally argue more so, or at least we will in the future think about Overwatch as a deeper strategical game than, for instance, CS, even though that is basically a ridiculous notion at the current time. I'm certainly not talking about how the games are currently played. I'm 100% aware that a game that has been out 1.5 decades has an effective, deeper strategy pool than Overwatch could have at this point. I'm talking about the inherent possibility of strategies down the line with lots of heroes, with lots of different maps, game types, with hopefully a deep meta that we will see a certain inherent strategical depth that will possibly surpass CS and will possibly rival League of Legends, at least on the macro base. No matter how ridiculous you find these notions, I think it's fairly obvious that even if we don't want to rank these esports titles, that Overwatch is a strategy heavy game, and that from that point out, a coach or at least an analyst will sort of be needed. Now, if we're looking at the current top 10 standings that, for instance, were just published by OverGG, which I'm inclined to agree with, they put the top 6 teams, all Korean teams, as of this moment. Now, the Korean culture kind of enforces a certain authority inherently by simply age, and therefore many people have pointed out also across other sports that this is paired with their work ethic is one of the big reasons Korea seems to be dominating every esports title that they culturally lock into. In order for the West to catch up, these coaches that enforce solid work ethic, and we have seen this trend in League of Legends and CS, will 100% be needed, I think. It's very hard to imagine a team that can self-manage and come up with strategies and can gel best enough to be world-class. Now, despite these fairly obvious factors of why coaches will be needed, this isn't really qualifying why I think they will become superstars. Now, I think with the OWL, or what the OWL will do, is take away power from players. Now, if you look at the power structure currently in esports, in relative terms, players have much more power than their counterparts in actual sports. That is, for instance, in CS, when a team of 3 players, so a team is made up of 5 players, if 3 players go to a different organization, they inherit the major spot, the biggest tournament spots, and basically leave the org high and dry. With the OWL now selling these slots and also doing it for a huge amount, and probably to tech companies or established sports brands, this is simply inconceivable that the same amount of power will be retained by the players. The city slot is not bought by players, they are bought by organizations, and it isn't ridiculous to say that they might be fired or benched over these disputes instead of their coach. Players most of the time will probably not have as much power in choosing their coaches as they did in the past. And to be perfectly frank, what currently constitutes or is termed a coach in esports is wildly different and can go from actual strategic impact and say in the team as an authority figure to glorified water boy. There's no chance of this happening in the OWL, simply because these big owners have an idea of what leadership personalities should be in the coach, and he will be directly responsible and will have a lot more say in what kinds of players he will be getting and so on. Also, players will be more readily accessible and more objectively accessible simply through the combine. So we have stats, and the bench will get bigger. This is also part of the increasing money flow, is that a roster can be bigger and players can be benched for authoritative reasons. We've already seen this happening in League of Legends. So basically, with the power structure now even more different because of no relegations than to League of Legends, I think it is quite possible that we will see much more typical alpha males in these head coach positions. So that now with a game that only is really being played competitively for what, 16 months or something, that these orgs will think to themselves, okay, maybe we will install an actual coach, no matter what their background is, and get analysts for these positions in order to, help with strategy. And will first and foremost look at leadership skills instead of, in-game knowledge. And for these head coaches to then learn the game after that. I'm not entirely... So what I'm saying, I'm not convinced that endemic coaches, or very many endemic coaches that we currently see in the scene, will make it to a head coach position. There are a few examples where I can imagine this being the case. For instance, with Kai, he seems to have the grit and the inherent leadership skills, as well as a mind for the game, that he could be one of the few. But for the rest, these are basically oftentimes, college kids that are grinding scrim footage of their team and, timidly suggesting to their players, maybe you could, try this, and I think I'm fairly confident that this will work. And the player has all the authority to basically say, nah, you're out, mate. Like, okay, owner, this doesn't work with them anymore. Give us a new one. This won't be the case, right? It's also, with the increasing amount of money in the scene, we will also attract higher quality personalities, because now we have the budget to actually, employ these people that aren't satisfied with a, mid 5-figure salary, but now the, lower six-figure salaries become, increasingly likely, with these amounts of, 3 million to 15 million being thrown around. This is, basically play money for these bigger sports teams. So why do I think that personality or coaches will be more, or the community will be more aware of coaches, is that they will be more permanent in the scene. They will get longer contracts. Star coaches will be traded between teams. They will be, as a commodity themselves, will be bought out as they deliver. And through this permanence, and also through the media attention these people will get, I think this will be more akin to the sports where we have the Mourinho and the, Arsene Wenger types that have these personalities that will be, a huge talking point in the OW Open. And that, personally, for me, this is one of the changes that I really welcome into the scene, and I'm excited about what kinds of personalities we will see in Overwatch in the future. Thanks for watching.